A deafening explosion rocked the earth above, sending a shudder through the cold metal walls of the abandoned bunker. The dim emergency lights flickered, casting jagged shadows that danced like ghosts. Ethan Locke gritted his teeth, pressing his palm against his side where blood seeped through his torn combat suit. The wound wasn't fatal, yet. He slammed the reinforced door shut behind him, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Outside, the distant hum of enemy drones signaled their relentless search. He had barely made it in time. His squad was gone, vaporized in a flash of plasma fire. The war was over for them. But for him? It had just begun. Ethan stumbled forward, his boots scraping against dust and debris. The air was thick with an old, metallic staleness, the kind that settled in abandoned places long since forgotten. He took slow, measured steps, scanning the interior. A sudden movement. His hand shot to his pistol, barely raising it before the darkness shifted, and golden eyes stared back at him. A woman. No, a Zalari. Ethan's pulse slammed against his ribs. His fingers curled tighter around the grip of his weapon. The Zalari were the enemy, ethereal in appearance but lethal in battle. Tall, slender, with skin like polished pearl and intricate horn-like ridges curling from her temples. But her kind were no fragile beings. He had seen them rip through entire units without hesitation. Yet this one, she did not attack. The Zalari woman took a slow step backward, her hands raised, fingers splayed in a universal sign of surrender. She was injured, one arm hanging stiffly at her side, a dark violet streak trailing down her forearm. Her blood. Ethan's throat was dry, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. For a moment, neither of them moved. The tension was a live wire between them, crackling with unspoken distrust. "Stay back," he warned, voice low, strained. The Zalari woman narrowed her golden eyes, tilting her head ever so slightly. Then, she did something unexpected. She spoke. "Human." The word was slow, carefully formed, as though unfamiliar on her tongue. Ethan's grip tightened. He had never heard them speak English before. They communicated through bioelectric pulses, untranslatable to human ears. But she had spoken. She had learned. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. She hesitated, then took a careful step forward. Ethan's weapon did not waver. "This place was ours," she said softly. "Before your war. Now it is only forgotten." Ethan swallowed hard. His war. That's how they saw it. Their world had never wanted this war. He wasn't in the mood for philosophical debates. Right now, his main concern was survival. "Are you alone?" he asked, scanning the dark corners of the bunker. A flicker of something crossed her face, an emotion too quick to catch. Then she nodded. Ethan exhaled sharply. If she was lying, he'd be dead in seconds. But he trusted his instincts, and something about the way she held herself, cautious, but not aggressive, told him she wasn't looking for a fight. For now. Another tremor rumbled through the bunker. The war outside was not waiting for their uneasy truce. If they stayed too long, the enemy, or worse, his own kind, might come looking. Ethan took a measured breath, lowering his weapon slightly. "You're injured," he noted, nodding to her arm. The Zalari woman glanced at the wound but did not acknowledge the pain. Instead, she studied him, his tattered uniform, the blood seeping through his side. Her gaze sharpened, calculating. She knew he was worse off than she was. Ethan didn't like being at a disadvantage, but there was no point in hiding it. He was running out of time. If he didn't find medical aid soon, he wouldn't make it through the night. The Zalari must have reached the same conclusion. "You will not last," she said simply. Ethan smirked despite himself. "Thanks for the vote of confidence." She didn't return the humor. Instead, she turned, moving deeper into the bunker. Ethan hesitated, but his choices were limited: trust an enemy or die alone. With a muttered curse, he followed. The bunker's interior was larger than he expected. The Zalari led him through a winding corridor, past broken consoles and rusting supply crates. It smelled sterile but ancient, like a graveyard of technology long forgotten. Finally, they entered a small chamber, an old medical bay. Ethan sagged against the nearest wall, exhaustion finally catching up to him. The Zalari knelt beside an old storage unit, pressing her palm against the console. A faint hum. A compartment slid open. Ethan's breath caught. Inside, neatly arranged, were vials of Zalari bioserum, a powerful regenerative substance, capable of accelerating healing beyond anything human medicine could offer. She lifted a vial, studying it. Then, slowly, she extended it toward him. Ethan stared. This was a peace offering. Or a test. Why? He asked, voice rough. The Zalari's golden eyes met his. Because you do not wish to kill me, she said simply. And I do not wish to watch you die. Ethan held her gaze for a long moment. Then, with slow deliberation, he reached out and took the vial. He pressed it against the wound at his side. The moment the liquid made contact, a sharp heat spread through his body, followed by a strange, soothing numbness. His breathing steadied, the pain easing just enough to think clearly again. When he looked up, the Zalari was still watching him. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. Then, softly, she spoke. Lyria. A name. Something human soldiers weren't supposed to ask. Something enemies weren't supposed to share. Ethan exhaled slowly, nodding. Ethan. Lyria tilted her head, as if tasting the name on her tongue. Ethan. Outside, the distant tremors of war continued. But inside this bunker, a new battle had begun, one fought not with weapons, but with something far more dangerous. Trust. And something even deadlier than that. The possibility of something more. The bunker was quiet, too quiet. Ethan had spent years in war zones, in trenches where silence was a prelude to death. His instincts remained sharp, every breath calculated, every movement deliberate. Even though the pain had dulled from the bioserum, he still felt its phantom echo, a reminder that trust was a risk he could not afford. Across from him, Lyria sat on the edge of a storage crate, her golden eyes fixed on him, not with hostility, but something else. Caution. Curiosity. Wariness. You're staring, Ethan muttered, breaking the silence. You are still alive, Lyria said, tilting her head slightly. That is unexpected. Ethan snorted. Yeah, well, I have a habit of disappointing people. Her lips pressed into a thin line unreadable. He couldn't tell if she found his humor amusing or irritating. Maybe both. The bunker was colder than before, the flickering emergency lights casting strange patterns across the walls. Ethan rubbed his arms, feeling the slight dampness of sweat on his skin. The weight of exhaustion dragged at his muscles, but sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. And neither could she. Lyria shifted, her hand pressing against her injured arm. The violet streak of her blood had darkened, drying in jagged lines along her pale skin. She hadn't treated it. Ethan frowned. You helped me. Why haven't you taken care of yourself? She hesitated. It was slight, but he caught it. My kind heals differently, she finally answered, though the stiffness in her voice told him it wasn't the full truth. Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. That's not an answer. Lyria's golden eyes flickered with something unreadable. She rose to her feet in one fluid motion, stepping toward a wall panel. Her fingers danced over the controls, the ancient system groaning to life. A holographic blueprint of the bunker flickered into existence, suspended in the air between them. You wish to leave, she said. This place has no surface access. It was built for containment, not refuge. Ethan studied the display. No exits. No ventilation shafts large enough to crawl through. No direct way out. Damn it, he muttered under his breath. Lyria turned to him, watching his reaction carefully. You assumed you could walk free. Now you see the truth. Ethan ran a hand through his short, sweat-damp hair. So what? We're just stuck here until someone, or something, decides to dig us out. She hesitated again, then slowly nodded. Frustration curled in his chest, but he forced it down. Panicking wouldn't do any good. He had been in tight spots before. This was just another mission. Another puzzle to solve. But that wasn't the only thing bothering him. Ethan turned back to her, studying the faint tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided his gaze. You knew, he said, realization settling like a weight in his stomach. You already knew we were trapped. Lyria's gaze didn't waver. I did. His jaw clenched. And you didn't think that was important to mention? Her expression was unreadable, but there was a hint of something sharp beneath it. Would you have trusted me if I had told you the truth immediately? Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. Damn her. Because she was right. He had entered this bunker expecting a fight, an enemy, a last stand. He had seen her as nothing more than another Zalari, another piece of the war that had stolen too much from him. If she had told him from the beginning that they were sealed in with no escape, would he have believed her? No. He would have assumed it was a trap. Ethan exhaled slowly. You're lucky I don't hold grudges. She arched a delicate brow. I do not believe that is true. A flicker of dry amusement crossed his face, but it faded quickly. They weren't out of the woods. Hell, they weren't even close. The war outside could rage on for days, weeks. What were the odds that either of their people would come searching for them? Slim. And even if they did, it wouldn't be for a rescue. It would be for extermination. The weight of their situation settled between them like an unspoken threat. Ethan crossed his arms. All right. No way out. What's plan B? Lyria studied him for a moment, then turned back to the holographic display. With a few fluid motions, she manipulated the image, zooming in on an underground section. A storage vault. This area was sealed off decades ago, she explained. But if the systems still function, it may hold supplies. Ethan exhaled sharply. Great. A scavenger hunt in a dead bunker. Sounds fun. Lyria tilted her head, a ghost of amusement crossing her otherwise composed face. Is that sarcasm? Ethan smirked. I dunno. You tell me. She studied him, then, to his surprise, a soft huff of breath escaped her. Not quite laughter, but close. Ethan blinked. Well, that was unexpected. Lyria turned back to the display, her expression smoothing into focus again. We should move quickly. The bunker systems are failing. If the power grid collapses, we may lose access to the lower levels. Ethan pushed off the wall, rolling his shoulders. Then let's get to it. The lower levels were worse than he expected. Dust choked the air, the flickering emergency lights casting eerie shadows against the walls. The corridors were narrower, older, lined with rusting conduits and half-collapsed metal beams. Ethan moved first, his instincts kicking in. Lyria followed in near silence, her movements almost too light, too precise, like she was more shadow than substance. A sudden sound, a metallic scrape against stone. Ethan's muscles tensed, his hand dropping to his pistol. They weren't alone. Lyria's posture shifted, her golden eyes sharpening. She raised a hand, a silent signal for him to wait. Then she vanished. Ethan barely had time to register it before a low growl echoed through the corridor. His pulse spiked. Not human. Not Zalari. Something else. Something that had been left behind. The shadows shifted. Ethan turned just in time to see a massive, insectoid-shaped lunge from the darkness. His pistol was up in an instant. 2 shots rang out. The creature shrieked. Then, from nowhere, Lyria struck. A blur of movement, a flash of silver as she drove a blade straight into the creature's throat. A wet, sickening crunch. The thing spasmed, gurgled, then collapsed in a heap of twitching limbs. Silence fell. Ethan exhaled, lowering his weapon. He glanced at Lyria, who straightened slowly, her breathing controlled. You fight well, he admitted. She met his gaze, expression unreadable. So do you. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, from deeper in the corridor, a low, guttural hiss. Ethan's grip tightened on his weapon. We are not alone, Lyria murmured. And just like that, the real fight began. The air in the corridor was thick with the stench of decay, the metallic tang of blood clinging to Ethan's tongue. The creature's corpse twitched once, its chitinous limbs scraping against the cold floor before it finally went still. The hiss that followed, low and guttural, sent a pulse of adrenaline through his veins. They weren't alone. Lyria shifted beside him, her blades still slick with the beast's dark ichor. She was poised, unreadable as ever, but Ethan sensed the change in her. She wasn't just prepared for another fight, she was expecting it. "How many?" Ethan murmured, his pistol steady in his grip. Lyria closed her eyes for a brief second, then opened them. 3. Possibly 4. He swore under his breath. Fantastic. The corridor ahead stretched into darkness, its walls narrowing like a throat swallowing them whole. Whatever these things were, they had survived down here, thrived down here. And they were hunting. Ethan inhaled slowly, controlling his heartbeat. The war had taught him many things, but one lesson had always stood out above the rest. Fear will kill you faster than any bullet. "We move fast," he whispered. "Hit hard, don't stop." Lyria's golden eyes gleamed in the dim light. She gave the smallest nod. Then they ran. The first creature struck from the ceiling, its elongated limbs slicing through the air. Ethan fired mid-stride, his shot punching into its exoskeleton. It shrieked, the impact sending it tumbling down, but another shape lunged from the left. Lyria moved faster than thought, her blade flashed once, then again, carving through the creature's throat. It collapsed, but its dying cry sent an echo down the corridor. Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed Lyria's wrist, pulling her forward. "Go, go, go!" The tunnel twisted sharply. Another beast burst from the shadows, claws raking toward Ethan's chest. He twisted, barely avoiding the swipe. The creature smashed into him, sending him crashing into the wall. Pain flared across his ribs, but he shoved the muzzle of his gun beneath its chin and pulled the trigger. The thing's skull detonated, splattering gore across the corridor. Ethan gasped, shoving the corpse off him, his breath ragged. Lyria grabbed his arm, hauling him upright. "We cannot fight them all," she said. "No shit," Ethan rasped. Another howl tore through the air. The rest of the creatures had heard. They were coming. Lyria's eyes darted toward a rusted hatch in the wall. She pushed against it, it didn't budge. Without a word, Ethan joined her, bracing his shoulder against the metal. Together they heaved. The hatch groaned open just as another shadow lunged from the darkness. Ethan shoved Lyria inside first before diving in after her, slamming the hatch shut just as a clawed hand scraped against the metal. Silence. Then, the scratching. The relentless sound of something, trying to claw its way inside. They were in a storage chamber, the walls lined with old, dust-covered crates. The air was stale but breathable. Dim emergency lights buzzed weakly, casting a dull glow over the rusted room. Ethan exhaled sharply, his hands braced on his knees. His pulse was still hammering, his muscles coiled tight. Lyria was across from him, pressing a hand against her side. A thin line of violet blood trickled from beneath her armor. Ethan's breath steadied. "You're hurt." "It is minor." He pushed off the wall, stepping closer. "You sure? Because I've seen how you minimize things." Lyria's jaw tightened, but she did not pull away as he gently peeled back the torn fabric. The wound wasn't deep, but it was there, a clean slice across her ribcage. Ethan exhaled. "Not bad, but it'll slow you down." "I will endure," he huffed. "Yeah, I got that part." Without another word, he dug into the pouch at his hip, pulling out a small medical patch. He pressed it against the wound, securing it with careful fingers. Lyria didn't flinch, but she watched him, closely. "This is unusual," she murmured. "What is?" "You. Helping." Ethan smirked. "Didn't realize I needed permission to be a decent human being." Lyria studied him for a long moment. Then, softly, she said, "Your people do not see us as worth saving." The words settled between them, heavy and unspoken. Ethan met her gaze. You saved me first, he said. I don't forget things like that. A flicker of something crossed her face. Not quite surprise. Not quite understanding. Something more. She looked away. We should not stay here long. They will find a way through. He exhaled, nodding. Yeah. We need a real plan. Lyria gestured to the crates. This storage may contain something useful. Ethan moved first, prying open one of the nearest containers. Inside, stacks of sealed rations, water purifiers, and, most importantly, power cells. His brows lifted. Jackpot! Lyria opened another crate, revealing 2 Zalari shock rifles, sleek, powerful weapons still in working condition. She picked one up, testing its weight. Ethan grinned. Now we're talking. She arched a brow. Do you even know how to use this? He reached out, taking the second rifle. It hummed to life in his hands. Point and shoot, he said. Easy. Lyria sighed. Humans. Despite himself, Ethan chuckled. Then a thud. The sound wasn't from the hatch. Ethan and Lyria snapped toward the far side of the chamber, where a faint blue glow pulsed against the wall. Ethan frowned. What the hell is that? Lyria stepped closer, running her hand along the surface. The glow flickered beneath her touch, a thin seam of light tracing the outline of something hidden behind the metal. A door. A sealed, ancient door. Lyria turned to him. This was not on the map. Ethan's pulse quickened. An unmarked chamber. A hidden passage. Something the Zalari never meant to be found. Before he could speak, the scratching at the hatch grew louder. The creatures had found a way through. Ethan looked at Lyria. We're out of time. She nodded once. Then we go forward. Ethan gritted his teeth, raising his rifle. Let's open it. And with that, they stepped into the unknown. The glow of the hidden doorway pulsed with an eerie rhythm, casting faint blue halos onto Lyria's pale skin. The creatures outside the hatch howled, the sound of their claws scraping metal a grim reminder that hesitation meant death. Ethan exhaled sharply, tightening his grip on the Zalari shock rifle. You sure you want to do this? Lyria spared him a glance, her golden eyes shimmering in the dim light. There is no other choice. She pressed her palm against the panel. A dull chime rang out as the seams in the metal hissed apart, revealing a narrow passage bathed in cold, sterile light. The air smelled different, cleaner, untouched by the decay of the rest of the bunker. Ethan scanned the passage. No dust. No debris. No signs of age. This place isn't abandoned, he muttered. Lyria's expression darkened. No. It is not. A distant clang reverberated through the air. The creatures had breached the outer chamber. Ethan stepped forward, tugging Lyria inside before slamming his fist against the door panel. The metal sealed shut just as something monstrous slammed against the other side. The corridor ahead stretched into the unknown. Ethan exhaled. Well, shit. The core of the secret. The passage twisted downward, the walls unnervingly pristine. No cracks, no rust, nothing to suggest this place had been touched by time. Lyria moved ahead, her fingers tracing symbols carved into the metal. Ancient Zalari text, glowing faintly beneath her touch. Ethan peered over her shoulder. What does it say? She hesitated before answering. It is not a language meant for humans. Try me. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she humored him. Roughly translated, it says, containment priority, do not open. Ethan's stomach tightened. That's comforting. Lyria's jaw tensed. Whatever is down here, it was meant to be forgotten. Ethan let that settle for a moment. Then why were they heading straight toward it? But before he could voice that concern, the passage opened into a massive chamber. And what lay at its heart made his blood run cold. The buried truth. A towering sarcophagus of metal and glass dominated the center of the room. It pulsed with a soft, rhythmic glow, as if something within was alive. Monitors flickered weakly around it, some displaying coded data in both Zalari and human script. Others showed anatomical scans, both human and Zalari, layered over each other, intertwined. Ethan swallowed hard. Lyria, tell me I'm not seeing what I think I'm seeing. Her silence was answer enough. He turned toward her. This isn't just a bunker, is it? Lyria's fingers curled at her sides. No. It was never a bunker. She met his gaze, the glow of the room reflecting in her golden eyes. It was an experiment. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. On who? Lyria hesitated. Then, a whisper, almost too soft to hear. On us. Ethan felt the weight of those words sink into his chest. Us. Not just Zalari. Humans too. He turned back to the sarcophagus. The war. The manufactured hatred. The lies. This was the answer. This was the reason. Before he could process it, the monitors flared brighter. Something inside the sarcophagus shifted. Ethan froze. Lyria! She took a slow step back. It is waking up. A sharp hiss of air escaped the chamber as metal locks snapped free. The glass surface fogged, then cleared. Ethan's gut twisted. A shape. Not entirely human. Not entirely Zalari. Something in between. Lyria's voice barely broke above a whisper. They tried to create a bridge between our kinds. Ethan gritted his teeth. And they failed. The thing opened its eyes. Cliffhanger, the awakening. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, the creature moved. Its body was wrong, uncannily fluid, almost too perfect. Lyria took another step back, tension coiling in her stance. We should leave. Now. Ethan wasn't about to argue. But as he turned, the creature spoke. Not in Zalari. Not in human tongue. But in both. You are not supposed to be here. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The voice was familiar. Too familiar. Because it wasn't just two voices blended together. It was his own. The air grew thick, suffocating with realization. They had been engineered. Both species. The war was never about domination. It was about control. The thing inside the sarcophagus stepped forward. And Ethan's world fractured.